Minutes. Awesome. All right, so thank you. And hi, everybody, and welcome to our Don't Cram for Your Exam Study Tips for Preparing for Your Finals presentation today for Exam Jam. Thank you all for joining us and for being here today. I'm going to start off by introducing myself a little bit. My name is Tiffany Vega. I am a tutor coordinator here with Task, and my role focuses on providing support services to recently graduated high school students that are now enrolled at Pitt. So basically students that graduated in 2020 or 2021. If you have questions about services that Task offers, you're more than welcome to contact me. I will be available for a little bit after the presentation as well to answer any questions or to give any help as needed. So we are here today, again, to talk about preparing for finals. As we all know, finals can be an extremely stressful time. Most of the time, students have a lot of other things going on during finals, including work, family commitments, outside things like that. And usually, in addition to preparing for your finals, you're kind of stressing out because you've got a bunch of different things going on at one time. But what we're going to do is talk about today some things that you can do to help to lessen some of the stresses that can accompany the finals and preparing yourself for finishing strong. So I know we have a couple of students here, so I just want for you to drop your name in the chat box, what major or program you are enrolled in or doing here at Pitt, and then what exams you're preparing for. Oftentimes people like to think that they're the only ones that are kind of stressing over some exams that are going on, but being able to communicate with others that you're maybe learning or going through the same type of exams or same type of finals is a really good way to help to kind of lessen the stress and knowing that other people are also preparing for the exact same type of finals that you are. So if you want to just put your name as well as, again, your major or program and what exams you're preparing for in the chat box. I can see that here. I'll give you all just a few minutes or just a minute or so to go ahead and get that done, and we'll go ahead and move on. All right, so if you're still typing, we're going to go ahead and just move on to the next slide, but please feel free to, at any point in the presentation, drop your name, major, program, and what exams you're preparing for. All right, so for our presentation, we're going to begin with debunking and discussing some myths and misconceptions that people sometimes have regarding studying or preparing in their studying. So some of the ones or myths that people may hold or have about studying can include things such as more times you read something, the better you'll learn it, that you should focus on one chunk of information at a time or one chunk of material at a time. The more time you spend studying, the better, that you can cram everything at the last minute and you don't really need to space out your studying, or that you don't need to develop or improve your study skills. So let's kind of address some of those misconceptions and those myths and kind of break them down a little bit to help us understand a little better about why these are myths and why they're misconceptions and how we can start changing our mindset surrounding some of these myths. So first off, the more times you read information, the better you'll learn it or you'll understand it. There's really no evidence that rereading actually works at all. For some people, it may help to kind of look at the same material over and over again, reread a sentence or maybe a bit of information, but just rereading and having that more passive, not very interactive manner of studying is really not that effective or impactful in helping to actually understand or remember information. And that's because our brains remember information better when we're interacting with it more actively. Studies show that the act of recalling information from your memory, so doing things like summarizing information in your own words, flashcards, doing brain dumps and things like that, is way more effective and way better at helping you to retain and remember that information than just simply rereading your notes and hoping that the info will stick. Next, that you should focus on one chunk of material at a time. Research has found that it's more effective to engage in what is called interleaved practice, which involves mixing different kinds of problems and materials across study sections or within the same study session to help you kind of remember and understand that information in a much more active and engaging way. So basically what that is kind of a version of chunking, which helps in your learning process by breaking large bits of information or large strings of information into smaller sized chunks. And within that chunking, practicing those interleave practices of mixing a couple of different practices or different problems and materials as you're studying the information. So for example, if you're studying something in biology, you might want to start off with just remembering or notating key terminology, and then moving into maybe looking at diagrams, and then looking into maybe answering questions as you're studying, instead of kind of doing it all in different separate chunks. So being able to interact with that information in various ways as you're studying can help you process and more easily remember that information. The next myth, again, is the more time you spend studying, the better. So maybe you'll say something like, I'll just study for 5 hours straight and just get it out and be done with it. Well, that sounds like a good idea in practice or in theory, but in practice, it's a really good way to lead to burnout and for you to just kind of disengage that information and really not remember or retain anything that you are learning as you are studying your information. So you can definitely reach a point of exhaustion when you're studying, and that produces a diminished return on your studying. And this is your time. This is really important time. You've got other things to focus on. So when you're studying, you want to make sure that you're not just powering through hours and hours of trying to get things done, and instead of giving yourself an opportunity to have some breaks, take a walk, stretch a little bit, maybe even just watch a little video or something to kind of turn your brain off for a while, and then go back to studying. Something where you're kind of giving yourself, again, a break in between your studying. Next one is that the more time you spend studying, the better. Again, oh, we did that already, excuse me. The next one is that you can cram everything in last minute. And if you have crammed before, you probably know that cramming is really effective for really simple quizzes and really not very diverse and deep subjects that you're really studying in, but cramming for the most part, it's pretty ineffective. And will usually just lead to you kind of panicking and not being able to recall information in a more deeply manner. So just because procrastination, maybe you're a procrastinator and it's worked for you in the past, so maybe like in high school or middle school or whatever, to just cram at the last minute, you've been able to kind of do okay in situations where you just procrastinated and crammed at the last minute. But typically in college, because you're usually studying so many different subjects at one time, cramming isn't really going to help you. So instead of cramming just a bunch of information in your head at the last minute before an exam, try reviewing your notes at the end of every week as you're getting closer to the end of your class schedule. Try to just review your notes at the end of every week so you're not having to cram or study at the very last minute. Or conducting bi-weekly sessions or study sessions with your classmates and your peers. You might be surprised at how well you absorb the information when you don't have an exam just breathing down your neck. But if you are kind of getting close to that exam date, try to schedule some time and prepare yourself at least a few days before your exam to start spacing out that studying. So you're not trying to do it all the night before, that you can focus on giving yourself some time to rest at the end of the night. And lastly, some people think that they don't need to develop or improve their study skills, but you can always improve your study skills. Using a study method for one course or subject may not work for another course or subject. So you may always need to continuously improve or evaluate and reevaluate and adjust your study skills to adapt to your study needs and the subject that you're studying. And you can just take a moment to, as we're talking about this, ask yourself, what myths or misconceptions have I had about studying, or have I held previously about studying? All right. So now that we've had some time to just think through some of the misconceptions and kind of break through some of those myths that you might hold regarding studying, we can start looking at how we can start improving our skills. And the first step in that is by evaluating. Evaluating is necessary because your learning needs and style are going to differ from other people. No two people learn and absorb information exactly the same two ways. When you are evaluating your skills, it's really important to kind of take stock for a second to think about what kind of learner you are, how you've learned the best in the past, what studying tips have worked for you or studying methods have worked for you in the past, and then start to focus on some of these evaluation areas that you can use to really start breaking down individually what areas you might need to improve on or what areas you might need to start working on as you start building or improving your study skills. So some of the evaluation areas that you can focus on as you begin to evaluate your study skills include time management. Now we hear about this all the time. Time management is really the key and really important concept and part of you being able to really effectively study. So ask yourself questions like, how are you managing your time when you're studying? Do you have a schedule of what days you're going to study or what times you're going to study? Are you tracking your studying time? Are you using a calendar or a planner to really look at how you're using the time when you're studying? Take a stock of when you're studying, what time you're studying, how many hours or minutes you're spending on it. Are you building in breaks? Evaluate the method of scheduling that or time management that you're using, and really start thinking about some ways that you may need to alter or improve or start changing some things, and really consider it from an aspect of what is going to work for you, not really what's working for other people or what you've seen other people use, but what kind of time management schedule is going to work for you. Do you work better in the morning times? Do you study better at night? Are you a type of person that you don't like to give your weekends to studying? Think about what works best for you. Next, you can evaluate some of your study habits. Evaluating your study habits includes taking stock of how you study and where you study. So things like, do you study in an environment that is quiet and free of distractions? Are you studying alone or in a group? Are you starting with the most difficult subject or the easier subjects first? How are those methods really working out for you? Also evaluate your concentration and focus when it comes to studying. How well are you staying on task when you're studying? Do you typically multitask? Are you maybe checking your phone, or is your phone really close to you? Do you have YouTube opened up in the background playing some music that might be distracting you for a little bit? What is your concentration? What does your focus look like? Are you maintaining your focus when you're studying? Do you find yourself kind of drifting or your thoughts moving away from what you're reading or what you're studying? That may be a really good way of you noticing that, hey, I'm not studying in a way that is effective for me. I'm studying in a way that's really boring, that's not keeping my focus, keeping my interest. Just checking in with yourself to see how well you're concentrating and how well you're able to focus on the subjects that you're studying. Ask yourself what your motivation and goals are. Why are you studying? Is it to get an A in your class? Is it to prove that you really do know the material? Is it to prepare yourself for an end goal? So maybe transferring to another school or preparing yourself to enter the workforce. Remember and take stock of the goal that you have and what your motivation is to study. And keep that in the back of your mind, because it will help you to really stay focused and be able to concentrate a little bit more, because you have that goal outlined to yourself. You know what your goal is, you know what your focus is and what your motivation is. Evaluate if you're using any type of study guides or how you're studying, what you're using to study. So are you just reviewing PowerPoints? Have you created a study guide before? Does your study guide need a little bit of work? And we'll talk about study guides a little bit later on. Is your study guide even comprehensive, or is it just a bunch of scrabbled notes kind of cobbled together in a way that isn't really conducive or doesn't really make sense? Take check of how you're interacting with the material. Are you using flashcards? Are all of your flashcards kind of well written and well organized together? Are you using graphs? What are you using, as a study guide to help you study? What materials are you using? And then evaluate your reading and comprehension skills as well. So when you're studying, are you summarizing information in your own words, or reading the text just word for word to remember? So how are you really interacting and comprehending the information that you're studying? What about your notes? Are you making notes and writing down things as you're looking at this information and as you're studying? How are you interacting with the information? How are you really comprehending understanding and digesting the information that you're studying? Are you writing down questions or asking yourself questions or thinking about other concepts as you're studying? Are you really just focusing in and honing in on one thing at a time and really not trying to make those connections to really deepen your comprehension as you're studying? Those are just some things that you can do to help you evaluate where you are with your study skills as you start preparing to study for your exams. And to help you furthermore evaluate your skills, you could do things like take a pre-made evaluation or create your own evaluation using these areas or any other areas that you think you might need to improve on. Or you could talk to a professional like us here at Task or an instructor, somebody that can help you really take stock of what your study skills look like and kind of give you some advice on maybe where you should go to start improving that. So now that you had an opportunity to evaluate where you are with your skills, let's discuss some methods to begin improving your skills to help you prep for this exam or for your exams. The first thing that you need to do when preparing to study for your exams is get organized. It's really, really important to have things organized before you start diving into studying. This will help you better manage your time more efficiently, prevent distractions, help you stay focused and maintain your focus, and really keep you on track during your study session to have to be able to just sit down in one place, get to your studying, and then not have to worry about anything else or trying to find something as you're studying, which could break your concentration. Proper time management is the key to beating procrastination, and organizing your studying will help you avoid procrastinating and falling into that cycle of anxiety from lack of preparation. So begin organizing yourself with a schedule. Use whatever works best for you. It could be a physical planner or an app. It could be calendar reminders that are sent through your phone. It could be a whiteboard. It can be sticky notes that are placed in an area where you're usually looking things at, like in your room or maybe on a calendar. Whatever works best for you as a way to keep yourself organized and keep yourself on a schedule, use that. Plan out which subjects you're going to be studying and on which day. If you have a few different exams coming up and they're around the same time, make sure you start outlining which days you'll be studying for which subject, so you're not mixing too many things at one time, which can help break your concentration and kind of take away some of that focus that you have on the subject that you're studying. Make sure you create an effective workspace when you're getting organized. Make sure your space is comfortable, free of clutter, clear of things, clear of distractions. Put your phone on the bed or maybe somewhere else in wherever you're studying at. If you don't have a place at home or somewhere where you can go study, try your library, a friend's house. We've got study rooms here at Task, which you can utilize. Figure out where you can get into a space that is comfortable, quiet, and free of those distractions so you can really get into a place where you're organized in the space you're studying at. Make sure that you organize and gather all of your files and materials before you start studying. So establish something like a paper management system by creating a landing zone, somewhere where you're going to place all of your files, books, notes, handouts, etc. You can organize materials that are electronic in an easy space, like on your Google Drive, by creating folders to house all of your study information by subjects into. So if you're, for example, studying for an exam and all of your materials online, you can create a folder where you can keep all of your PowerPoints, notes, your study guide, everything for that class or that subject all in one area. So you're not having to click through many different types of locations to find the information that you need to start your studying. Bookmark sites that you'll know you need to access or use to study, and organize those bookmarks by subjects or classes as well. So you're not having to click through a bunch of different bookmarks if that's what you need to do. You can also bookmark your Moodle sites or any sites that you need to have on hand for your exam or your finals. Try establishing and sticking to a routine. This right here really goes back to you scheduling your time in a way that makes sense for you. Having a routine that you can stick to when it comes to your finals, that you know that, hey, I've got finals this week and next week. I have a routine for my studying. I'll get up at 7 a.m. I still have class until 2, and then after 2 o'clock, I will study for 2 or 3 hours on XYZ days. Having that routine will help it make it you kind of be a little easier if you stick to the schedules that you set for yourself, because you already know what to expect. You know what to do after your class is over. You know what to do after you get off work. You know that you are going to be studying. That stick to a routine, or find a routine that works best for you. Maybe you like to do something like make coffee or put on some quiet music before you start studying. Have that stuff in place with your routine before you start sitting down and really diving into your studying. And then lastly, create a support system. So use tutoring if you need to. Come into a task, reach out to us. We're here to help you. If you need some support with preparing for your finals, or maybe just answering a question or understanding a concept, reach out to us. Talk to a friend or an instructor or a staff member if you need any help or assistance with, again, improving your study skills, getting yourself organized, maybe making a study schedule or a routine. Tell a friend about the schedule that you have if you would like somebody to help you remain accountable. Maybe you need for a friend or somebody else to check in with you. It's like, hey, you told me that you're supposed to be studying for your exam today from 3 to 4 o'clock. It's 3:30. Have you studied yet? Do you need to start putting in the time to study? Have somebody help you be accountable. Figure out what support system works for you, and then start building that. So some people can help you just stay a little bit more on track with your organization and with the plan you set out for yourself. Be sure that when you're studying and when you're scheduling your schedule together to help you get organized, that you remember to put in breaks. So if you're the type of person, again, that likes to take long sessions, maybe study for an hour or so at a time, make sure you add those breaks into your schedule so that you know when you need to put a pin in your study time and then take a break to really refocus yourself and refresh yourself. And again, make sure you maintain that accountability by either checking in with a friend or a professor, an instructor, a staff member. And schedule time for your other activities as well. If you know that you've got, band practice or maybe a meeting or something, schedule those activities on your schedule and your calendar as well. But make sure you have your study times on your schedule, on your calendar, just like anything else that you would have. So next, we're going to talk about making a study plan. So you've got your organization together, you've got your schedule together, you know what times you're going to be studying. You can make a study plan to help you really plan out what you're going to be doing while you're studying. So one of the first things that you can think about doing while you're creating your study plan is to have a goal in mind. So think about what you're going to be studying during this session, what you're going to be focusing on. If it's anatomy, is there a certain subject or concept that you need to spend the most time on, and how are you going to study that? Make sure you have a goal for your studying, so you know what you're trying to accomplish, you know what you're trying to study during the time that you're studying. Having this and having your goal and plan will help you just eliminate any of those unnecessary things that you don't need to study. Maybe in a subject, you know that you have some concepts that you already understand really well, and you pretty much only need like a quick refresher over, but then you have some things that you know you might need to study a little bit more on. Make those your goal. Make those concepts that you need to spend more time studying a goal that you'll set for yourself. Plan your time, and we talked about this ad nauseum at this point, the time management, but it's just too important to stress, especially when you're preparing for finals. You have to manage your time in a way that makes sense and that works for you. In your study plan, you should know how long you plan to study for a particular topic or a particular subject. And again, make sure that you plan those breaks within your study times, enter those times into your schedule so you can go even further and break it down. If you've got in your time schedule where you're studying from 2 to 4, go even further and break down what you're going to be studying at what times. And if that's too much for you, you don't have to do it. But if you're the type of person that really wants to make sure that you get your studying done in a complete way and in a way that isn't wasting your time, that you're not wasting, things that are, or any unnecessary steps, or studying things that you don't really need to focus on for too much, go ahead and break down what you'll be studying at which times during your study time. Focus on active studying techniques when you're in your study plan. So things like making a study guide, flashcards, paraphrasing. In your study plan, make sure that you notate and outline ways that you're going to be actively studying while you're studying. And then you can start with using a study guide. A study guide is going to help you put all the information that you're studying or that you need to study in one place. And again, we'll talk about our study guide or creating a study guide in just a second. But having a study guide will help you be able to directly look at what you're studying, and what you need to study all in one nice little neat organized manner. So you're not having to, again, click through a bunch of things, try to remember what term or what concept or what terminology or whatever you need to be like really looking at. It'll all be right there in your study guide already. You can start with your most difficult, again, or time-consuming topic first. In your plan, focus on studying, what you're going to need to spend the most time on, how long you're going to plan to study it. If it's a specific topic and you know that you're going to need to spend more time on it, adjust your study time accordingly. And then use groups effectively. So if you're planning on studying in a group, make sure that you and your group already have scheduled your time and location ahead of time, and that all group members know the time and the meeting time at the location. Be sure to put that in your schedule and account for any travel time if you need to travel to that studying location. But if you're using groups, make sure that everybody understands where they're meeting at, what time they're meeting at, what they need to bring to the study session, and that everybody is also aware of what you'll be going over or studying during that study group. And then lastly, evaluate your plan and adjust as needed. So when you're making a study plan, you're probably going to notice that you'll have to kind of adjust the study plan for different subjects or different areas. You should never stick to a one-size-fits-all study plan for anything. Depending on what you're studying, you're going to need to adjust it, because for some subjects you might be a little bit better in, where you don't need to really focus in so much and spend so much time on studying. And then again, for those other subjects, you might need to spend more time. So adjust your plan as necessary. And this is just a really cute little study plan that you kind of look at. I've listed out for geology. You've got a goal, study the last 3 chapters of your textbook. You know that you've planned your time, you're going to study for 2 hours on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. You know that you're going to actively study by creating graphics of rock formations and making a brain dump of topics and of information that you know that are related to those topics. And then you've scheduled your time for your study group Tuesday at 3 p.m. or 3 o'clock. Whoops, 1 second. Looks like I messed my slides up. All right, sorry about that. I accidentally clicked on one of these tabs, and the tabs take you to another section of the presentation. So we're going to get back into it. All right, so now we're talking about passive versus active studying. You've got your study guide, and we talked a little bit or touched on a bit about, making sure that you engage in active studying practices. But what exactly are active and passive studying practices, and what's the difference between them? Well, passive studying is what majority of students usually familiar with when it comes to studying information. And that includes things like just rereading or looking over the information in a textbook, maybe highlighting large chunks of information, or listening to the information, or watching a demonstration or documentary. But it's really passive. You're not actually engaging with the material information. You're not doing anything. You're just kind of sitting there listening to it or absorbing it, but you're not really absorbing it. It really creates an illusion of knowing for a student, meaning that you're just reading this information over and over again, and it might be familiar to you. You might have seen it before, but you're not really understanding what you're reading. Passive study strategies definitely take less time and they feel easier, but active study strategies are going to be more effective and efficient because they'll help you really move through that information and move it into your long-term memory in a more quick manner. So those active studying skills are going to be, a study strategy that allows you to manipulate or interact with the information so that you better understand it and remember new information. Some active study strategies can include things like rewriting and revisiting notes in your own words or paraphrasing, making outlines, making flashcards, teaching the material to someone else, or answering practice problems. You're not just looking at that information and kind of seeing it or just listening to it. You're actively doing something that will make you interact with that material. And I always love this quote about when thinking about passive versus active studying by Benjamin Franklin: tell me and I forget, teach me and I remember, involve me and I learn. And here we have just a couple of ways that you can start incorporating some active strategies if you're more used to doing those passive strategies. So if you're studying things like lecture notes and you're used to just rereading notes and writing down exactly what your instructor says, you could try identifying the main points, creating charts and diagrams, or have a partner quiz you. If you're used to just reading and underline assigned text and articles, change the chapter headings into questions while you're reading so that you can kind of start remembering or answering questions as you're reading through materials. Oh, I'm learning about rock formations and I forgot how indigenous rocks form. And as you're reading through the chapter, how do indigenous rocks form? You can just go ahead and start answering that question as you're reading through it. Read a few pages, stop and summarize. I really like doing those really short summaries when I'm reading through long paragraphs. I'll do like 100-word summary or something because it forces me to really take that information and condense it into just the main idea. And also helps you just remember and absorb it a little better. Assigning problems and exercises, try solving while looking at class examples. So if you have maybe like a problem that you've learned in the math class that you've written down, just take that same problem and start solving it again, and then looking back at your notes to see and make sure that you solved it, the same way or a way that will get you the correct answer in class. If you're reading PowerPoint slides or lab reports, you can print them out and read them, annotate, make flashcards from the information on the PowerPoint slides, quiz yourselves on your models or materials, and recreate diagrams by leaving out the labels and terms, and then practice filling in the information on your own. So now we're going to talk about study guides and how to utilize study guides to really get the most out of your study session. So with your study guides, it's really important to remember that every test has a specific set of topics that you're going to need to learn in order to prepare for your exams or your finals, right? In a perfect world, your teacher would give you a study guide for every quiz, test, or exam, but that's just not the way that it usually works. What a study guide does is condense information or condense topics into a single source of information for you to be able to refer to. One of the most important content displayed in the most important content in your study guide is displayed in a clear and concise manner, making it easy for you to study multiple topics at once. In your study guide, you can do things like write an outline of each chapter with key points, a chronological timeline for subjects like for history, concept map to give you kind of a visual of important things. You can include your flashcards into your study guides. You can include test questions or multiple choice questions or practice examples for you and so much more. You can do so many things with study guides, but again, it's really important to remember to make them interactive and make them an active studying part of your study session. So how can you start creating your study guide? Well, first you need to change your perception of what a study guide is. If you're one of the people that thinks that study guides are just questions with answers to them, it's time to burst that bubble. That is a really old way, and again, a passive way of looking at a study guide. What we're talking about now is taking a study guide and making it an active learning experience. Start thinking of your topics or of the information that you've included in your study guides as questions for your test, not answers necessarily. You can start by reviewing your material. Making a study guide is kind of like studying too, and just by writing down the key concepts and key information, because you're quickly kind of going over and looking back at some of the things and some of the concepts that you've learned previously. And it's a really good way for you to be able to kind of review and start thinking about reviewing as you're just labeling and writing out those topics or your headings or the subheadings for your as you're reviewing the material for your study guide. Skim carefully through your textbook, any notes that you might have taken, PowerPoint presentation, basically anything you've seen in class. Start picking out those key ideas, key topics, so you can start making those headlines and those subheadings for your study guide. Identify important concepts or terms from each lesson, chapter, module, whatever you've been using in your course. It's really cool to also know how you enjoy learning when you're creating your study guide. So if you are the type of person where you know that you really like making things and interacting with the information in more of a physical way, start putting into your study guide a section for you to maybe draw out notes, hand draw your own graphs, or maybe drawing in your own flashcards that you'll be able to use, or your own slight rephrasing section. So somewhere where you can go ahead and start putting in some examples of the ways that you enjoy learning into your study guide. Like, remember, if you remember things better by seeing them, include those pictures, visual aids. If you learn best through hearing things, include links to videos or to recordings of your lectures or to podcasts and so on. Try to scaffold your comprehension. And what that means is building your comprehension, organize that information by different levels of learning. For example, when you're building out your study guide, you can start with filling it in after you've got your headings and your subheadings. You can start by filling in initially with vocabulary words or key terminology and definitions. And then the next section of your study guide, you can start including those key concepts, visuals, examples. In the last section, you can include practice questions or maybe ways that you can start quizzing yourself on the information or problems that you'll need to solve. So scaffold your comprehension as you are building out your study guide to help you really be able to move through that information in a way that's going to help you absorb it better. Utilize visuals. Remember the powers of visuals as you're building out your study guide. Build your comprehension by creating concept maps, Venn diagrams, graphs, and charts for your studying. You can also include things like mind maps, brain dumps, concept maps to help you visualize, understand, and demonstrate the relationships amongst concepts and ideas. Remember to paraphrase when you are creating a study guide. Do not just copy down information, never copy down information word for word. It is going to be very difficult for you to remember a long and drawn out, overly complicated way of understanding the information. So taking the information that you're reading as you're kind of going through building your study guide and putting it in words that make sense to you in your own words is not only going to help you interact to have that active studying component, but it's going to help you understand and digest that information in a way that's better for you because you're having the opportunity to interact with and manipulate that information and then remember it in a way that makes sense for you, the way that your brain works best. So take time when you're doing this to explain a theory or a term in your own words. That way, when you move into taking your exam, you'll remember the way that you've remembered it and that you've phrased it and that you've written it. And if you have questions about when you're paraphrasing, making sure that you have, things or concepts outlined correctly, make sure you always reach out to your instructor or peer to kind of review some of those paraphrasings and some of the ways that you've written things, just to make sure you're not missing the mark on anything. And lastly, in your study guide, create examples. So you can create examples for when you'll be able to maybe apply the information you're learning to real world situations or to situations that are relevant to you. So if you're interacting with information, list out some examples of maybe when you would be able to use that information or example of when you could maybe, you would have to have that information on hand for an important situation in your life. Figure out or label any type of real world situations that make sense to you. This is going to help you apply or understand how to apply that information in a real world setting and a setting that makes most sense to you, kind of create that meaning. So it'll be more easy for you to recall that information later on because you've already understood or built a way into your mind of how you could use that information in an actual situation. So building out your study guide. Best practice is to make study guides throughout the semester, but if you are in a time crunch, still allow yourself enough time to break up the work into bite-sized pieces and really focus on completing one task before you move to the next. Have all of your materials together before you begin putting together your study guide. Again, we just love the time management and organization. Do you know where to start? Use chapter headings. Again, we talked about that, and subheadings to begin making an outline of your study guide. As you begin organizing your topics, think of questions that you might have and start writing down those questions on a separate sheet of paper so you can go back in later on and start answering those questions as you're building out and scaffolding your understanding in your study guide. Create those visuals on your own. You can draw them. Find something online that you can use to make those visuals. Maybe if you've seen them in your textbook, copy the ones from your textbook or find examples of visuals online that you can insert into your study guide. And then again, scaffold your learning. Remember to do that. Create a summary sheet. Make sure that you have instances for you to be able to understand that information in many different ways, many different levels, and include all of that in your study guide as you're building it out. And so what we're going to do next is actually look at a couple of visual examples that you can insert into your study guides, like concept maps and branching diagrams, comparison charts, concept cards, diagrams, and timelines. So we'll look at a couple of those. So you can get an idea of maybe some ways that you can start inserting visuals into your study guide. You could do things like labeling important concepts on one side and then having your questions on the other side as you're reviewing those important concepts, making diagrams, doing things like creating flashcards where you're having your terms in the front and then, obviously your answers in the back, or some types of graphs or tables where you're kind of labeling and entering information, drawing things on your own, making timelines. There's many different ways that you can use visuals in your study guide to help you remember information. And so we're also going to talk about now some learning styles. Most of us by this time have probably heard about learning styles, and knowing your learning style is going to be a really cool way to enjoy learning in a way that's most beneficial and makes most sense for you. It's a really great way to make sure that you stay interested when you're studying and that you don't kind of study in a way that isn't really enjoyable or a way for you to memorize and process the information in your best way. So obviously you kind of probably have heard at this point in time the three different main types of learning styles. And normally people find that they're a combination of these learning styles. So you'll usually have people that are visual, auditory, or tactile and kinesthetic. Visual learners enjoy things like pictures, diagrams, videos, other visual representations of information. Auditory learners prefer listening to lectures or podcasts or talking out loud or hearing themselves re-say words or re-say concepts and other forms of auditory learning. And then tactile kinesthetic learners like to do while they're learning. So they like to write or build or draw, interact with things in a way that really lets them be able to be hands-on and have a chance to interact with that material. So maybe even just pacing as you are studying is a really great way for you to be able to really interact with that. If you're a visual learner, so how does this stuff translate to kind of more other ways you can study? If you're a visual learner, you might want to take the concepts that you're reading out and then make a picture or make a graph or maybe make your video for you to be able to watch later on. If you're an auditory learner, you might want to repeat that information out loud in a way where you're rephrasing it so you can kind of remember it and hear it in your own words. Or you might want to discuss it in a group setting or try teaching that information to someone else. And again, if you're a tactile kinesthetic learner, pace while you're reading, get up and move around, do some squats while you're listening to a podcast or something, some way where you're moving and interacting with the information. You're not just static and sitting down as you're kind of reading through things. And so I have a quiz right here that you can definitely take in your own time that I'll put in the chat that you can use to find out what type of learner you are. Oh, Emily, I'm so sorry. I'm just seeing your message in the chat what a brain dump is. Yes, I love brain dumps. Brain dumps are basically when you just, you take a piece of paper or you start writing in like a Word document or something. You put a concept or a topic in the middle or somewhere on the paper, and then you just start writing anything that comes to mind about that topic. So for example, if you're writing about bears, or you're learning about bears, you would put bears in the middle of your paper, and then you would start writing down anything that you can remember that's related to that topic. Bears are large, bears can be brown, black, or white. Bears sleep in dens. Bears, baby bears are called cubs. Bears live in the woods. Bears can climb trees, things like that. Whatever you remember about a topic, it's a really good way for you to kind of recall that information even before you start studying, because it will help you kind of see what you might already know. And you may notice and remember that you actually know more than you thought you did about a certain topic or a certain subject. And so I did put that the learning styles quiz in the chat box. So whenever you would like to, you're more than welcome to take that exam and figure out what kind of learner you are. So we're going to move along here because we're definitely running a little bit short on time, but that's great to hear, Alexis. I'm really glad that you made it A2 in your final exam. And we can talk a little bit after about some help that you might need to wrap things up. But to go ahead and finish out the rest of our presentation, we're going to kind of focus on how to study for specific subjects. So if you're studying for a few different subjects, you can really utilize these strategies to make sure that you're not crossing over too much information and kind of confusing yourself as you're preparing for your finals. Now, you might be in a bunch of classes that are maybe related. You may be in classes that are wildly different. So having an idea of how to study for specific subjects and breaking your studying up is going to help you be able to focus on making sure that you're not crossing over too much information or overwhelming yourself as you're studying. And so you can do this by identifying the information or skills that you need to learn to be successful in each of your classes. So looking back at your syllabus to see what the objectives are. Usually your instructor will have your learning objectives listed at the top of your syllabus. You can use that to start identifying what you really need to know and understand for this class. You can choose study strategies that force you to interact with the information that is appropriate to the course that you're in. So if you're in an art class, you might need to go ahead and make sure that you're looking at pictures of art that you might need to be able to recall or remember certain specifics about later on. If you're in a music class, you're obviously going to make sure that you want to listen to music and really understand the nuances of the music that you're listening to. If you're in an anatomy class, you want to make sure that you can label certain things correctly. So you might need to interact with that information in a different way that's, that might be a little bit different than the other classes that you're in. And make sure that you're choosing strategies as you're studying for these classes. They'll let you practice in a format of your upcoming test or assignment. So if you're in an English class and you've got maybe a writing assignment or an essay due for a final, you want to make sure that you're practicing writing out or making an essay before your exam. If you're going to have a multiple choice test, you might want to take a couple of multiple choice tests beforehand so you can just get back into the habit of looking over the answers, getting rid of the ones that don't make sense, and then answering those multiple choice questions correctly. So studying STEM, if you're taking STEM courses, so science, technology, engineering, or math courses, you're usually going to be required to demonstrate your problem-solving ability. And this typically means being able to understand the terminology being there we go, and apply it in appropriate concepts in order to solve a problem. So some ways that you can study for STEM courses is by making a list of important concepts, formulas, and diagrams, and making sure you have that in your study guides. So just review your notes, make a concise list of those concepts and formulas, and make sure you know and understand how to properly use those formulas. Rework homework problems. So if you've had examples over the course of the semester, take those examples and rework them so that you're not just going over and trying to, find things that aren't related to what you're learning. Rework your book or note examples, cover up the solutions that are included in your book or your note examples and try to rework them. We're looking for problems from the book. Don't forget that most books have a review section at the end of chapters. So you can usually use that to get more problems that you can start using to answer. Look for identifying characteristics and problems as you're doing your studying. Understand what subject or what section what you're studying came out of. It'll help you provide some clues to the solution process. During your exam, you can also do this. And also you can try taking a practice exam. So Google practice exams for certain math sections that you're in or science sections that you're in and see what practice exams exist out there so that you can take them beforehand to help you be a little bit more comfortable and maybe feeling a little bit better about knowing what's going to be on your exam. And so really quickly, we'll talk about some in-person and online exam tips. Obviously, you want to set a reminder so that you can be on time. You don't want to show up late for your exam, particularly if it's in person. Similarly, you also want to make sure you're setting it to make sure that you can do your online exam if you have to take it at a certain time. If you have a certain amount of time to take your online exam, then make sure that you understand the time frame or when that exam is going to be due. Make sure you get a good night's sleep and eat properly so you're not hungry or tired or sleepy during your exam. And also make sure you're prepared. Make sure that you bring a pencil or paper or notebook or whatever you might need, or Scantron, whatever you need for your exam. Know what you need beforehand and bring it with you. If you're taking an online exam, make sure you understand where to go to take your online exam. If you need any additional materials to take your online exam. When you're taking the exam, set an appropriate pace. Set a pace that allows you to get through questions in a way that makes sense for you, so you're not rushing through or you're not taking too long on maybe a certain question. Answer what you know first. If you're reviewing things and you see that you are kind of stuck on a couple of things, you might want to try answering what looks familiar or what you know first, so you can go ahead and get those out of the way and then focus on those harder questions after that. Read and reread questions and directions completely before answering. So please read all the directions on your exam before you start. What I usually suggest doing is reading through or looking through the entire exam if you can, before even getting started, so you can have an idea about what questions are there or maybe what you'll need to do to complete that exam. And then before you answer a question, make sure you've read it thoroughly and that you really understand what's being asked of you. Look for keywords and topics that are in your questions. That might help you kind of recall some information as you're looking through things, and make sure you recheck your work before you submit. When you're taking online exams, make sure that you follow some of the exact same tips that we have for in-person, but know what to do if you have technical problems. Don't refresh or change your tabs. So if you're in your exam, don't leave out of that exam, because you don't want something to happen where you closed out of it, you can't get back in. And be sure to recheck your work before you submit or hit next. All right, so test stress. It's really normal to feel some stress as you're taking exams. Some stress can be helpful for you. That can actually help you stay motivated and kind of keep you going and getting through your studying session. But you should definitely know when stress is too severe, and it can impact your performance. Some students actually suffer from testing anxiety, which is where you have lots of anxiety brought on from an exam or from knowing that you have an exam. It can interfere with your ability to recall knowledge from memory and really do your best on your tests. And I have this right here listed out, just some questions you can ask yourself to see if you suffer from testing anxiety. Things like, I have a hard time studying for a test. I feel desperate or lost when studying for an exam. I don't sleep well the night before an exam. My appetite changes. I'm often confused or suffer with those mental blocks when I'm taking exams. And if you feel like you're having a lot of testing anxiety and a lot of stress, then you can do things to prepare and manage that stress. First off, prepare for your exam. Make sure that you've given yourself enough time to really focus on and study for that exam, so you're not cramming at the last second and bringing on more stress than needed. Make sure you have a plan. We talked about creating a study plan and scheduling our time and our time management. Make sure that you really know when you need to be studying, how often you need to be studying, and how much you need to be studying. This is going to help you alleviate a lot of the issues that you have surrounding testing anxiety and make it a little bit easier for you to hopefully feel a little bit less stressed because you already have your plan in place. Address negative thoughts. Try to get those thoughts like, I'll never pass this exam. I can't figure this out. I just will never get it. Get those thoughts out of your head. Try to make sure that you're not spiraling or in that anxiety spiral cycle. And if you notice that it's happening, really address those thoughts. Confide in a friend, go for a walk, take some deep breaths, and don't get back at doing your work until you've kind of calmed yourself down and really manage those negative thoughts. And envision success. You're smart. You're in college. You know what you're doing. You can succeed. You can do well in your exam. So envision yourself making a good grade on your exam or your final. Eat well and rest. Make sure that you eat again before your exams and that you get a good night's sleep. Arrive early so you're not late and stressing yourself out for making, if you get there late and really starting off on a bad foot. And then relax during your exam. If you feel like you're overwhelmed or you're feeling like you're just kind of getting a little bit more anxious during your test, breathe, take a couple of breaths, and have some time to relax during that test so that you can focus in on what you are doing. And if you really feel like you just can't manage your stress, talk with someone. We have counseling services here on campus. Here is the information for those counselors. You can reach out to them. They're open Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Call or email them if you feel like you need to discuss test managing or managing your testing anxiety with anybody. All right, that is all I have for you all today. Thank you all so much for joining me today. I'll stick around for a few minutes if anybody has any questions or if you'd like to talk a little bit more about preparing for exams. Otherwise, I hope you all enjoy the rest of your semester and that you all have a great rest of your day, and good job, and hopefully you all will do really well on your exams. Thank you.